As 2021 enters its final weeks, economies across the world are bracing for the possible impact of the new Omicron variant. For 2 years, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the global economy in ways not seen since the Great Depression. Supply chains have been upended, lockdowns and travel restrictions have bankrupted once prosperous industries. A global energy crunch has also sent consumer costs skyrocketing. Turkey has been especially hard hit with rising prices. Speaking on the lira's volatile swings and high inflation, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan urged households to be patient. He said the recent fluctuations would stabilize and that his economic model based on lower interest rates would help spur job growth and exports. Last month, Turkey's Minister of Trade said the country had logged a monthly record with exports hitting $21.5 billion. The country's latest GDP figures also showed a growth rate of 7.4% in the third quarter. But despite those positive signs, fears still linger if that growth can carry on into the new year and if prices will start to stabilize soon. And to discuss Turkey's new economic model, joining me now in the studio is Taha Arvas. He is an economist and an adjunct professor at finance at Boğaziçi University. And from St. Gallen, Switzerland, Guido Cozzi. He is a professor at the University of St. Gallen. A warm welcome to you both. Taha, could you talk to us about the current outlook of the global economy and how has the discovery of the new COVID-19 variant impacted economies and industries worldwide?
Right. The answer is it changes day to day. In other words, when the Omicron variant first came out, everyone thought it would be horrendous. Oil sold off. Markets were in a panic. And then suddenly news came out that it may not have been as bad as we thought, and they recovered a little. But in general, what we see here is that the global economy in general is in flux. Yes. We have inflation all over the world. We have risks that people can't really measure. The United States just released data saying that it has the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. But at the same time, 12 million people have left the employment rolls. So the short answer is everything is changing quickly, and policymakers are trying to figure out what's going on. So
Guido, let me turn to you. What else is fueling inflation across the world? We know Europe and North America are facing labor shortages and an energy crunch. Is that helping to fuel higher prices?
Absolutely. Also because we shouldn't forget that the COVID period has damaged the productive side of the economy by freezing workers, firms, entrepreneurship in many sectors, interrupting trade, value chain, and other similar problems. The economy is not able to produce and to supply as much as it could before the pandemics. My impression is that governments are only partly aware of that. And in many cases, they have mistaken a supply problem with a demand problem. So they try to increase spending and plan for more and more spending. This would work when people were scared and they were just saving. But now that people, the private sector has restarted spending, then demand has exceeded supply. And we know in economics that when demand is higher than supply, prices rise. And if this persists, inflation rises.
Yes.
So this is a big problem at the moment.
So that brings us to Turkey. Despite the fall in lira, Turkey is adopting a new economic model based on lower interest to create more jobs and raise exports. Could you explain how that could work?
Well, I mean, you really have two choices. Globally, we're in this economic crisis. So you can do two things. You can either raise interest rates like countries like Brazil and South Africa and many European Union countries have done. And Turkey has seen that raising those interest rates has only exacerbated their problems. So the Brazilian currency is down 30% since the coronavirus pandemic, despite its raising interest rates. So Turkey has said we have two choices. Our economy, unlike Brazil, we don't have a lot of natural resources. We are very much dependent on consumer consumption. Yes. So if we make it easier for consumers to consume, we can get through that. I mean, there's a report out from Barclays saying that inflation will peak in Turkey after the first quarter of 2022, and then it'll begin to fall after that. So what the government and policymakers are trying to do is hold off until then to kind of shore in, to allow consumers to continue to spend and continue to continue their lives despite inflation.
Okay, so Guido, what's your take on this? Is this policy of low interest rates to stir the economy towards more manufacturing and exports sustainable despite all these high prices and everything?
Clearly, if we increase interest rates, we will depress private demand, particular investment, which is important for increasing the production capacity in the future. And also, we would be using the wrong policy, the wrong medicine, because the problem, in my opinion, is caused, the inflationary problem, by the excess public spending. So the direct policy I would use is to refrain the public sector from spending too much and accommodate private recovery with reasonable interest rates, so with low interest rates. Instead, I'm afraid that in the US and unfortunately also in Europe, the danger is that they may increase the interest rate, which only aggravates the problem.
Okay, so how long will it take for this policy of lower interest rates to show positive signs, or is it impossible to tell now?
I mean, it's difficult to tell now. I think probably in the first half of the year, we should see results. And this is a theory that many, I mean, it's called the new Keynesian theory, as you know. There's a professor at Stanford called John Cochran who moved there from the University of Chicago, and this is his theory. He says, quote, there is weak evidence to link lowering inflation with lowering interest rates with increased inflation. He says just the opposite is true. So this is a theory that he has, and right now we're actually seeing that globally. So even if you have higher interest rates in all these countries, then you have a problem with inflation.
Yeah.
So we'll see in the next few months. But if I'm going to quote Barclays again, they believe it'll happen in the second quarter. Yeah.
Okay, so Guido, this year Turkey is on track to see a GDP growth rate of 7.4%, if I'm not mistaken, which will make it one of the top performers of the OECD. Can higher exports and strong GDP growth offset the negative effect on a falling lira?
Well, yes, because exports are important, and the balance of payments has both current account and the financial account. So relatively low. I mean, the interest rates in Turkey are not low at all in nominal terms. Of course, in real terms, they are, but the problem is to fight inflation. So if maybe part of demand, the public sector, for example, demand goes down, and if more people enter the labor force, also I would try to address young people and women. There is a lot of room for improvement there. Then the supply of goods would increase, which will benefit inflation. So the fight against inflation, and also will help produce more and better and improving the current account.
So when do you think, Taha, the recent fluctuation in lira will stabilize? Again, the second quarter of next year?
There's a paper that has the answer to this. It's called Overconfidence in Currency Markets. Currency markets are completely supply and demand. So the answer is it's very difficult to guess. But I was just in the U.S. Last week, and I saw with my own eyes that the labor market has broken down. There are thousands of people. 12 million people have left employment in the last 4 months in the United States. So in general, there's a global breakdown of markets, labor markets, et cetera. So unless these stabilize, no one is safe. But ultimately, the pandemic has to come to an end, and people have to continue with their lives. So I hope that'll be sooner than later.
So Guido, what's your take on that? I mean, what is the most constructive thing that can be done to get back to normal?
Well, vaccination. And the problem is that 1 year after vaccination started, we still have 60% of the world population unvaccinated. My opinion, there is a productive capacity problem. We should transfer know-how and have at least one or two firms per continent producing them. And I'm thinking of the African continent in particular right now. It would be great for Africa to have something comparable to the Serum Institute of India, which is producing about 1 billion doses a year, and it's helping India out of problems. If we had done that for South Africa, for example, maybe by overcoming some of the intellectual property rights limitations, as actually India and South Africa had asked, and several other countries, then maybe now we wouldn't have Omicron.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Guido, thank you very much for joining us from Switzerland. And Taha, thanks for being here with me on set.